Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, John from the MS Pierce's Ukraine War News Update. I guess third part thereof for today. We're going to be looking at military aid and geopolitics all in one video. It's a lot of content going out today because I did my mapping update and another little extra. Now, I had released two polls because the YouTube app went a bit nuts and just put both, they multiplied the poll. It got stuck and it just put it out twice. So I've deleted one of the polls for my members. So I've done a members poll just to see how US aid how they think the US has assisted Ukraine throughout the course of the war. If you filled out the first poll and put comments on there, sorry, that is now deleted. Please redo that. I really want to see what members think about how the US has helped Ukraine over the course of the war, what their opinion is. So please go back to that poll, go to my channel page and find that again and just re-log it. Make sure that if you'd put it on one and not the other, please just make sure you've logged your opinion, because I really want to capture that. Thank you to members for doing that. I don't do enough of my members, just little polls. I just don't have enough time in the day. Right, anyway, we're going to start with military aid, and we're going to start by looking at this rather cryptic statement. So Ukrainian Foreign Minister Sybiha, so remember he's taken over from Dmytro Kuleba, he was the deputy, now he is the foreign minister, hinted at, quote, historic decisions that will bring Ukraine closer to victory, following a conversation with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. What does he mean? So Sybiha himself said, as part of our regular dialogue, had a productive phone call with Secretary Blinken to follow up on Zelensky's US visit and coordinate further steps that will lead to historic decisions and bring our victory closer. Now, is that cryptic, or is no reports there just, is that a typical sort of statement? Yeah, we are coordinating further steps that will lead to historic decisions. The use of historic, is it hopeful? Like, we're doing these things to lead to what we hope will be historic decisions? Or is this like, actually, I know something and there are some historic decisions just about to be made by the US on behalf of Ukraine? So I don't know. It could be something, it might not. Right. KNDS, French-German manufacturer, on the sideline of the Kyiv Security Forum, they've signed a contract to produce and deliver 12 Caesar self-propelled guns to Ukraine, according to French Defense Minister Le Cornu. I said this yesterday, and I was wondering whether this is over and above what they've already decided to build, because there are these 78 that have been pledged, being paid for by various people. But for this to come out of the conference, that must surely mean another 12 are going to be provided. So I presume, was it 76 or 78? 78. If it's 78, then that's going to be 90 in total. The Caesars delivered to Ukraine. Now, last I heard, I think they upped it to, I might be, was it 12 a month they can make now? Or have I completely overdone that? Anyway, these will take some time to filter through the system, be manufactured and sent to Ukraine. Right, Anton Gerashchenko says Anne Applebaum has published an article in The Atlantic that, as she says herself, is different from most recent articles about Ukraine. She excitedly describes the drone factories and other military facilities that she saw in Ukraine and notes how much they have evolved since last year. Remember, I reported on someone who said that he'd seen a drone manufacturing facility that was kicking out 100,000 drones a month. 100,000 drones a month in one facility owned by one company, okay? So they really have shifted their manufacturing capacities right up. So Anne Applebaum calls on the West to support Ukraine's military production. That, in her opinion, is one of the components for a Ukrainian victory. And I think people are well aware of that. The conference that took place just the other day of all those Western or allied defense manufacturers together, they have sort of the equivalent, if you like, to the UDCG, Ukraine Defense Contact Group, that meet to, Ramstein, to meet to give statewide aid to Ukraine. Well, that's also happening on an industrial scale as well, with the different industry entities. The other components, she says, a shift of thinking in the West. Western leaders spend far too much time worrying about red lines and toying with the area of idea of land for peace. However, as Ms. Applebaum explains, these suggestions mean nothing if Russia doesn't agree to them, and Russia has no intentions to stop the war. The two ways Russia can stop the war are either Russia depleting its resources completely, or when they finally understand that Ukraine's alliances are real, this is a quote from her, that Ukraine will not surrender and that Russia cannot win, just as the British decided in the early 20th century that Ireland is not British and the French decided in 1962 that Algeria is not France. So must the Russians come to accept that Ukraine is not Russia. The alternative, says Gerashenko, it is often said that dictatorial regimes will strengthen if Ukraine loses, but actually the axis of evil already keeps getting stronger during this war. Russia's cooperation with Iran and North Korea is blooming, and there are reports that Russia is building a drone factory in China. Ms. Applebaum concludes with, quote, "The democratic world remains wealthier and more dynamic than the autocratic world. To stay that way, Ukraine and its Western allies have to persuade Russia to stop fighting. We have to win this war." Amen. And this gets onto the idea that Russian appeasement, particularly if we're going to talk about America, she's American, right? So the US is going to say, right, we're going to force you to negotiate Russian appeasement, etc., and say Trump wins in November and his ideology and lackeys hold sway, then you are basically advocating for dictatorship. You know, it does go down to this. The democratic world remains wealthier and more dynamic than the autocratic world. And if you want it to remain that way, to stay that way, she says, Ukraine and its Western allies have to persuade Russia to stop fighting. This isn't about persuading a negotiation to come about where it's fair for both sides. This is about Ukraine prevailing because it really is. Ukraine represents democracy. Russia represents autocracy. And if you think it should be fair for both sides, then you don't really understand kind of political ideology, or at least you have no firm grasp of what you want the world to look like, or you actually want the world to look very different from, you know, how it looks in the US and whatnot. And I think there is this worrying trend in the kind of cultish behavior of many in the American political scene, whereby actually they don't mind moving towards some kind of dictatorship. They don't mind shutting down the voices of leftist dissent or whatever. They don't mind shutting down the woke liberatis. You know, there is this idea that actually we could do with a little bit of dictatorship. Such a dangerous route to go down, because once you give in to dictatorship, you don't get democracy back very easily. You know, that is just a wholly worrying state of affairs. Anyway, that's me just having a little bit of a sidebar. Right, back onto military aid. The Swedish high-speed armoured combat boat, so the CB-90, remember they provide CV-90, which is their infantry fighting vehicle, in service with the armed forces of Ukraine, is operational in the Black Sea. So, of course, here is the CB-90, looking quite boaty and floaty and speedy and gunny, and yeah, good stuff. Now, I know they're getting a bunch of these sorts of boats. I do wonder what the function of these boats is, because I doubt they have much function for taking down Shaheeds and whatnot. Yes, you can put on heavy machine guns and fire. You can float them out in the Black Sea and try and shoot down Shaheeds. Okay, fair enough. But realistically, you know, would you not be using these somewhat offensively to support raids into Crimea? But is that likely to happen? Like, I do wonder about the utility of receiving a bunch of these boats. So yes, better having them than not having them. But I don't know how much they would get used defensively as it stands. So therefore, you start then getting a bit excited. Oh, are Ukraine going to mount some kind of offense using boats like this? But then I don't know. But on the other hand, you hear that Russia is now ramping up construction of unmanned sea vehicles, so drones on the Black Sea. Well, you would assume they're going to put them on the Black Sea, and if they do that, then these sort of boats might well be useful, although they also become targets themselves. Right. Over 1/3 of the ammunition planned under the Czech initiative has been delivered to Ukraine already, says an envoy. Ukrainian ambassador hopes that the initiative would extend into 2025, also supporting Ukraine's domestic ammunition production. So while Ukraine is ramping up its own production, and while Europe and the US are ramping up their production, The Czech initiative is busy going around the world getting loads of ammunition, but also spending a lot of time making sure it doesn't blow up in a barrel because some of it is a bit shoddy. But over a third of it has been delivered already is pretty significant. Now, there were some claims earlier, because yesterday I talked about how the fire rate ratios changed from 8-1 to 3-1. And I was saying, look, this is going to be reflective of more ammunition getting to the front line, and then also think about the drone asymmetry there, so that the Ukrainians can also close that gap even further if you include what drones do. But it's worth noting that it might not just be that the Ukrainians have ramped up their production, but the Russians have had their depots blown up. So the Toropets depot and the one 16 kilometers south of that, and the Tikhoretsk depot, all happening within 3 days. There are some, I think the Russian vlogger, Vorenka, war blogger 13th, has said that there is a shell hunger going on for the Russians. It could be that those ammunition depots are being destroyed is now showing on the front line. That would be very, very interesting. CSG and Ukrainska Bronetechnika have signed an agreement on the production of artillery ammunition in Ukraine. So this is another, I presume, another facility in the offing with the Czech group there being involved. Now, to stay on the Czech Republic, Czechia, Tatra heads to Ukraine with donations, so I presume that's this truck, a Tatra truck, with donations for Ukrainian villages, energy sources or drones. On Thursday afternoon, Defence Minister Yana Chernyshova accepted a donation for Ukrainian villages in Koprivnice, a total of about 3 million crowns. The aid was donated by the Czechoslovak group. Good stuff there. Czechia coming together to help out. It's an interesting place. I think, am I right in saying there's a bit of a right-wing government there in Czechia, but they are staunch supporters as a country of Ukraine, rather than going down the Hungary and Serbia direction, and Slovakia too. Now, Sweden pledges 2.4 million euros to boost Ukraine's war crime investigations. The fund will support the Smereka e-case management system in Ukraine, upgrading digital infrastructure for law enforcement and prosecutors. So thank you very much, Sweden. Good stuff there. Now, this is somewhat controversial. Ukrainian MP and Secretary of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, Roman Kostenko, stated that mobilization in Ukraine should begin at age 20. So if you remember, mobilization rules changed so that it was 27 was the age of mobilization. Now it was moved to 25. So it has moved 2 years further forward. But it's not including sort of 18, 20, 23-year-olds. He's criticised a generation that he claims does not want to defend the country. He also mentioned that US congressmen have expressed frustration that Ukraine is not mobilising men under 25. Interestingly, I was speaking to Tembi Powell recently, the former Tauranga mayor from New Zealand, who is helping out with Kiwi Care, and is heavily involved in Ukraine. So go and check that live chat out. It's really, really good. He was saying that it's a good thing that they haven't got mobilization younger than 25. So there are two ways of looking at this. Some say you need to protect the young people to protect your future, get some children, make sure your demographics are sorted, get people to have qualifications so that, past the war, you haven't just completely turned your population into just automating soldiers or whatever. You're skilling people up. So there are some really valid arguments not to mobilise under the age of 25, and then there are also arguments to mobilise under the age of 25 because you desperately need those troops. So I do understand that. I don't think it's quite so clear cut, and I know this guy is on the younger side of things in terms of changing regulations there. But yeah, I don't know that I definitely agree. I guess I don't really know the answer. It depends what your goals are. If your goals are more troops, more human beings right now, and that's it, don't need to think about anything else, then of course mobilise from 18. If you are thinking about the economy, if you're thinking about the intellectual economy as well, if you're talking about skilling up your population, if you're talking about giving a chance for your young people to have children, if you think about demographics, which then feeds into a sustainable economy going forward, then actually there are lots of other things you need to consider. And we always need to understand that there's more nuance. Like, we need to always ask, how can this be more complicated than it is? You know, life is complicated, situations are complicated. Am I just interpreting this way too easily? Because otherwise, yeah, let's mobilize everyone. Okay, a Russian Sectormet net thrower quadcopter with 4 nets, one under each propeller, is being shown here. So this is a Russian innovation. They seem to have I literally just muted you, you absolute muppet. They seem to have done a better job of creating these anti-drone drones with net capabilities. Obviously, this is able to fire 4 different nets, and they are effective at bringing down drones. And the other thing about bringing down drones with a net is you can potentially go and grab that drone as well and use it again. So yeah, that is what the Russians have been successful in doing, and that looks pretty useful. Now, to remain on Russia, PS01 says Russia is so desperate for soldiers that it had to triple its payments for soldiers in the area where weapon production is taking place. So we've heard so much about labour shortages, not having the people to fulfil the vacancies or fill the vacancies in these particularly defence manufacturing jobs. 90,000 jobs are available or have been seen to be available between August and September. So I presume it's similar still. And that is because people have, draft dodged and escaped the country. You've had people going to war and dying, and people going to war and being injured and returning, not able to do those jobs, so on and so forth. The idea is that there is just a huge demand for workers. Now, that they are tripling the introductory wage for soldiers in areas where there's defence manufacturing is another piece of the jigsaw to show that they are desperate and that they are lacking in workers. The army is basically hindering weapon production, says PS01. Russian industry has already lost 300,000 people after partial mobilization. The new realities of recruit, I'd say it's way more than that. So if you're thinking about mobilization, deaths, injuries, and people escaping by leaving the country, then it's going to be way more than 300,000 people. The new realities of recruiting contract soldiers are worsening the situation not only in peaceful industries but also in the defense industry. Economists fear the depopulation of Russia. I mean, this was already an issue before the war started. Here, this article, SVO, so Special Military Operation versus Military Industrial Complex, why regions with strong defense industries are increasing payments to contract soldiers. The hunt for contract soldiers, which began in midsummer, has reached the regions where weapons for the SVO are forged, so on and so forth. Obviously, this is written, from a Russian perspective. We don't call it an SVO; we call it a war. From August the 8th, contract soldiers began to receive 500,000 instead of 400,000. From September the 1st, the payment was doubled, and from October the 1st, it was tripled to 1.5 million rubles. I don't know exactly what. Is that Sverdlovsk they were talking about? Yes, Sverdlovsk region. Anyway, let's go on now to geopolitical topics, and we're going to start with the Russian economy still. The Russian gas giant Gazprom was ranked as the most unprofitable company in Russia last year, ending 2023 with a record net loss of $6.1 billion, according to Forbes Russia on October the 3rd. So we know that it was partially tanked by Russia deciding to put a massive tax burden on the company, which is kind of interesting. You're just really hamstringing a company that is your main source of income. I don't know about the wisdom of doing something like that. Anyway, yeah, it had sort of record losses, didn't it? I think, or at least in living memory, or more recent memory. Moscow will be starved of funds to run its war economy if Saudi Arabia delivers on plans to hike crude production to protect its own position as a global oil kingpin, according to Politico. So Saudi Arabia is now exporting more oil itself to grab a market share and profits even as prices fall. So what you have is OPEC, these oil-producing nations that have got together as a cartel, and then you've got OPEC Plus, which is add a couple of these other ones on, which I think Russia is part of OPEC Plus. It has been towing the party line. So when OPEC have said, right, we want to cut supply, because you cut supply, it pushes up the price, supply and demand, right? Not so much of it around, so therefore the price goes up. And if they want to maximize profits but keep supply in check, then they cut supply, price goes up, people have to pay more. And that's what they were doing to keep the price high enough so that they were making enough per barrel. Russia went along with this, and this cut their production. The problem for Russia was they've been cutting their production voluntarily, whilst also seeing the price per barrel not as high, and they're trying to get it higher, right, by cutting production, but it's not high enough. And so Russia's been double whammy hammered by not getting enough per barrel and cutting production. So then they're just not making the money they need to. Part of the reason for this is, I think, and my speculation, but the US has been flooding the market to try and keep the oil price down, to keep inflation in check so that it's good for the economy. The benefit being also in an election year, people aren't feeling it in their pocket. So the Americans are pumping more oil than they've ever had. And they've ever done, producing more oil than ever. In fact, they're buying some back because the price has been so low to fill up their strategic reserves for when they did flood the market to keep the prices down. So the US has done some clever stuff itself that benefits itself, but also has helped to hammer Russia by keeping that price per barrel artificially low whilst they're still cutting their production outside of the US. Right, no report says Saudi Arabia could destabilize Russia's war funding by causing an oil price drop. Traders suggest that Saudi Arabia may increase oil exports to gain more market share even at lower prices. This strategy could severely impact Russia's economy, which heavily relies on oil revenues, posing a significant risk to its budget. Additionally, other unpredictable factors like the upcoming US presidential election could further complicate the situation for Russia. Kiev Independent talks about this. Saudi Arabia's planned oil production hike threatens Russia's war economy, obviously from Politico, but we'll go through it because I like Kiev Independent because A, it's Ukrainian, and B, it summarizes things I can just read you the whole article and it's only like 5 paragraphs. Right, Saudi Arabia's plan to increase crude oil production could seriously undercut Russia's fossil fuel revenues needed for its war against Ukraine. Riyadh plans to abandon its unofficial price target of $100 per barrel and drive up production to ensure its dominant position in the global market. So what they were trying to do is get the price up to $100 a barrel. That would have been great for Russia because they would have been getting loads of money per barrel and happy days. Then US and probably other reasons, the barrel price has just been still way too low for them to do that. So it could be that Saudi Arabia is going to go, right, sod getting more money per barrel, we're just going to sell more barrels. And we need to do that and lead that, because otherwise as other people do that, then they'll get the sales there. So it looks like Saudi Arabia just going, screw you, Russia, don't really care about you anymore. Let's make some money ourselves. So Riyadh's planned, I'm no expert on this as well, you can tell, so I could have this completely wrong. Riyadh plans to abandon its unofficial price target of $100 per barrel to drive up production to ensure its dominant position in the global market, even at the cost of dropping oil prices, the Financial Times reported last week, citing its sources. So again, by us selling more and more, the price will come down and down, but hopefully we'll overcome the price coming. The idea is we want to maximize the amount of money we make, and there's this sweet spot between supply and demand, etc., your equilibrium. And what they're kind of saying is that, yeah, okay, we understand that if we sell more oil, the price will come down, but if we can quickly sell a bunch more oil, then before the price can react so much, we'll make more money. It's just, we've worked out that we'll end up making more money if we just do it this way, given what everyone else will be doing, etc., etc. Russia is greatly reliant on oil and gas profits, which have represented almost a third of its country's total federal income in 2023 and 42% in 2022. Fossil fuel profits thus play a key role in funding Russia's expensive war machine. Alexandra Prokopenko, an economist and fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, told Politico that a $20 fall in oil prices at current exchange rates would cause Russia a loss of 1.8 trillion rubles, or $20 billion in revenue, which is roughly 1% of the country's gross domestic product. So basically, the longer the price is below $60 a barrel, the more Russia is screwed. And this will only make it go down further. and it's already below. I think Russia are getting less than 60 at the moment, or it's been around there, or is it less than 70? Anyway. This would force the country to either cut funding, which is an unlikely step during a full-scale war, or accept growing inflation and significantly higher interest rates, the expert concluded. Saudi Arabia has previously sought to convince other OPEC Plus members to cut production to maintain higher prices, which is what Russia voluntarily did on the behest of Saudi Arabia. However, the lack of coordination and unilateral hikes by countries like Russia reportedly frustrated the Gulf country and convinced it to reverse course. In September, the oil price briefly dropped below $70 per barrel, the lowest since December 2021. So that must be, $70 per barrel. Of course, there's the official price per barrel, and then there's a price oil cap for Russia, although they appear to be able to get around that. So with Russia, it's maybe a little bit more complicated than saying the oil price dropped below, because it depends how much Russia are able to sell it for, because it might not be reflective of the global prices. Riyadh aims to resume the scale of its production in December, even at the cost of prolonged drop in prices, the Financial Times reported. Bad news for Russia. Excellent. Right, the State Duma, Russian parliament, has proposed introducing a childlessness tax. So this is going back to your labour shortage and a much longer term demographic trend, a trend actually that much of the Western world and China as well actually are also suffering or on the brink of suffering. Go and watch people like Peter Zion, who's just talked about this an awful lot. Quote, yes, I would like to introduce a tax on childlessness. Of course, they will beat me up for the idea, and how else? The Liberals will be the first with a whistle. I don't give a damn. That's how it is. What remains of a man in this life? If you are carried away feet first tomorrow, what's left? Oh, nice bit of nihilism. The first is the name. The second is the children. Okay, everything else is of no interest to anyone. This is probably the main thing. If you are the real man, your family which you left on this earth, said United Russia member Andrei Gurulev. Earlier, a bill banning, quote, public propaganda of child-free people was introduced to the State Duma. So it's now like illegal for you to celebrate childlessness, or even as a company, I guess, use advertising that might even like neutrally reference childlessness, I guess, is an issue for them. Right, Russian RuTube, so this is their YouTube equivalent. Now, YouTube is no longer available in Russia. Google Play, so the Google App Store, has removed RuTube, the Russian alternative. It's now only available to download in the United States. RuTube representative characterized the app's removal as a funny confusion. Now only available for download. I don't know what that means, because surely it's not available if Google Play have removed it. So unless there are other services where you can get it. But basically, I assume this going to be part of the sanctions rather than Google just being... The thing about Google is they own YouTube, right? So they don't want RuTube being used anywhere, because actually that will eat into YouTube's profits and reach, etc., etc. So any excuse to not sell RuTube would be snapped up by Google. So whether it's sanctions or like just falling in line with the US administration desires, or whether it's an economic, financial decision, a market decision for them, I don't know. Right, Russian Federation is paying Moldovan citizens to vote against the country's EU accession in the upcoming referendum, according to Politico, quoting the country's government. The bribery is reportedly being conducted through the pro-Russian network of oligarch Ilan Shor. According to police, more than $15 million was deposited into the accounts of 130,000 Moldovans in September alone. In other words, 130,000 people have been paid, the idea being in order for them to vote against the EU referendum. Quote, Moldova is facing a phenomenon of vote buying combined with hybrid warfare and disinformation, the likes of which our country has never seen before, said the Moldovan police chief, Viorel Cernutanu. This is really worrying. I would just call off the EU referendum, say, we'll have a referendum, just not yet. Oh, Russia, have you lost all that 15 million? It's not paid for anything. Oh, well, yeah, we'll put it off until further notice. Thank you very much. It's just something needs to be done about Russian interference and Russian disinformation, which is interference. As Max24 here says, it was designed to influence crucial votes on President Maya Sandu's European aspirations this month. I know Benny Pie is a big fan of Moldova. He's been there a few times. Yeah, real shame to see it a battle. He said, it's one of the most generous nations, but one of the poorest nations. Or it is, I think, the poorest nation in Europe. In September alone, $15 million was transferred from Russia to activists from an electoral bloc affiliated with fugitive oligarch Ilan Shor. I think Ilan Shor's political party has been banned in Moldova for being basically a Russian proxy, really. Tim White says, just seen this from a couple of days ago, Russia agitprop agent very close to a senior NATO official and Romanian presidential candidate. So what's this about? Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project says a Romanian political strategist who helped prepare former NATO deputy chief Mircea Geoana's presidential campaign has recently registered a joint venture. His partner in the company, a Russian businessman who appears to have led a double life. So we'll just look into this a little bit here, and there's some evidence thrown out there. Alexei Kozlov is an aquaculture specialist who loves fishing. Under the name Alex Krepchinsky, though, he appears to have been a firebrand propagandist who began stirring up pro-Russian sentiment after the 2014 invasion of Ukraine. And you can go and read about that at the CRP here. Just again, it's just another example of how I love a title that says substantial evidence. It's just another example of how Russia are just interfering with every freaking country they can, particularly in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe. I mean, goodness me. Russia have to lose this war against Ukraine. They have to. Not just for Ukraine, but for the democratic health of Europe and indeed the world, for global stability. They're just meddling in everything. Right, next to report that the EU has suspended all high-level meetings with the Georgian authorities, and here's a country who is definitely being interfered with by the Russians, due to the anti-Western and anti-European rhetoric and actions of the ruling Georgian Dream Party. Now, I've talked about this before. We've had this kind of rhetoric previously where they've stopped accession talks with Georgia. Georgia's supposed to be moving towards the EU in the West. Even Georgian Dream, the Georgian Dream Party, was voted in on that. That was part of their agenda. However, they've completely reneged on that and gone back the other way since gaining power. There are elections this month in Georgia, but it's very clear in which direction Georgian Dream are trying to take the country. They've had the Foreign Agents Law. They've tried to pass some laws against LGBT people just this last week or two, going full on kind of autocratic direction, not kind of liberal democracy direction. And we saw those protests from the population previously when the Foreign Agents Law was passed, and eventually it was vetoed by the president, then smashed through Parliament because Georgian Dream have the majority. And Europe have this, or the EU has this decision as to whether to use the carrot or the stick. You use the carrot and try and entice Georgia towards you, then that could work. Or you could say, right, no, screw you. We're not going to talk with you until you sort yourselves out. The problem with that approach is that you allow Russia to go, oh, they're not going to talk to you. Oh, we'll sort you out. We'll pay for this. We'll do for this. We'll do that. And we'll keep Georgian Dream in power. And the more you push nations away, and this is a problem with like Slovakia, Hungary, Serbia, etc., etc. And this is why I have no answer on which is the best way, because I don't know. It's difficult, carrot or stick, or kind of a bit of both. Like the more so say you kick Hungary out of the EU and the UN, EU and NATO, then all you do is, and the same with Turkey, you kick them out of NATO as the nation that sits in the center of the world, controlling the Black Sea through the Bosphorus Straits, that connection between Europe and the Middle East, Judeo-Christianity and Islam. Turkey's this massively important nation. The more you get annoyed with how they speak out of both sides of their mouth, you kick them away, then they go to Russia. The reason why they are in NATO is because of the Bosphorus Straits. You don't want Russia to control the Bosphorus Straits. So that's why Turkey in NATO, and the more you use a stick, the more they go across. They've asked to join BRICS, and you're like, how do we deal with that? Because if we say, well, screw you then you lose them to BRICS and you lose them to Russia, and they've also got loads of military technology that is NATO technology. So it's difficult, and the same with Hungary. The more you want to kick them out of the EU, the more you're just saying, here's part of Europe that we're just going to give to Russia. Difficult, really difficult. On the other hand, you can't just sit back and go, oh, okay, we'll let you do what you like. Quote, if Georgia becomes a one-party state where political opposition is banned and civil society is forced to go abroad, if the rights of minorities are not protected, Georgia will not be able to become a member of the European Union, neither today, nor tomorrow, nor the day after tomorrow, said Georgia Pavel Kaczynski, the EU ambassador. Quote, in addition, we discussed how we should approach the anti-Western and anti-European narrative, propaganda, and conspiracy theories, and decided not to have any high-level contacts with the current Georgian government. This is why there have been no high-level visits to Georgia or high-level meetings with Georgian authorities in Brussels in recent months, Kaczynski emphasised. It's a real crunch time for the Georgians, and I really do hope that the population just take the sensible option and eject Georgian Dream from power. But, when you've got a party that's been seizing more and more power over time and making laws more efficient and more beneficial to them, will you get a free and fair election? Right, breaking news, says Daniel Freund. The EU Commission is to sue Orban's Hungary, so carrot and stick, bit of stick here. EU Commission is to sue Hungary over their Putin-style sovereignty law. The Commission decides to refer Hungary to the Court of Justice of the European Union, considering its national law on the defence of sovereignty to be in breach of EU law. So continuing issues, continuing schism between Hungary and the EU, and you just hope that Hungary doesn't take people with them. They already exist. The Fidesz party already exists in this horrible coalition on the far right in Europe, where they're already causing problems through Euroscepticism. Any more of that, and it's just it's a growing problem. It's a cancer that needs to be exercised. But I don't know how you do that without just gifting Hungary to Russia. And this is where Peter Magyar, the opposition leader, is so important in Hungary. Because I bet if you actually went to Hungarian people on the street, like sat them down and said, right, here's the situation, blah, 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 blah. Would you like to be a part of Europe? And all that money that you get out of Europe, because I'm pretty sure you're not a net contributor. So would you like to be a part of the EU, or would you like to be out of it? I bet they'd be like, yeah, actually, we'd be okay with it. Most people would be like, we're happy to be in it. Well, then stop freaking voting for that numbnut over there. Swiss ambassador has denied that Switzerland is in support of the China-Brazil peace plan. So remember I talked to you about this China-Brazil peace plan that I think doesn't even include having Russian soldiers being removed from the territories. So it's basically just a Russian appeasement. Anyway, Switzerland have just been over to a meeting, but they've clarified that they attended the recent China-Brazil peace meeting by saying they only went there as an observer. So Switzerland getting a bit of a rat knuckles there, possibly. In Lithuania, I love this. Russian conductors. It's not the first time we've seen this, actually. A number of vehicles and things have been stopped. Like vehicles with Z signs have been told to get them off, etc., etc. Although nowadays, I don't think they're even allowed Russian vehicles, are they, in some of the Baltic nations. In Lithuania, Russian conductors were forced to erase the Z from their carriage, according to the media outlet Delphi. The transit train was allowed to continue moving only after its boss and subordinates removed all provocative symbols. Current fundraiser. Oh, sorry about that bit. Yeah, interesting. I like that. Good. And it communicates to them. Do you know what? Outside your own country, we all think you're plonkers. So just stop it. I say we all. There's just been a rally for peace in Ukraine, in Germany, with thousands of participants from the far left. Pink Floyd's David Gilmour has rejected Roger Waters' reunion over support for genocidal dictators. This is brilliant. Right, so Pink Floyd, absolute cult band. The huge amount of respect has been garnered over a long period of time for the band. Unfortunately, Roger Waters, a member of the band, is an absolute wingnut. And at the moment, he's like advocating for all the wrong people in the world, Putin and this and that. He's your typical, you might as well rename himself Jackson Hinkle. He's just an absolute douchebag. So David Gilmour has firmly rejected the idea he will never again share a stage with his former Pink Floyd bandmate Roger Waters, saying, quote, "I tend to steer clear of people who actively support genocidal and autocratic dictators." Absolutely. The guitarist 78 responded with an unequivocal no when he was asked by The Independent last month whether he might reunite the 81-year-old bassist Waters. In a new interview with The Guardian, Gilmour was once again asked whether the pair might put their differences aside and replied, "Absolutely not. I tend to steer clear of people who actively support genocide and autocratic dictators like Putin and Maduro. Nothing would make me share a stage with someone who thinks such treatment of women and the LGBT community is okay. On the other hand, I'd love to be back on stage with late Pink Floyd keyboardist Rick Wright, who was one of the gentlest and most musically gifted people I've ever known." So stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Roger Waters. That's enough from me. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Appreciate all of your support. And my goodness, I think I need a cup of tea. And do you know what? I'm going to go and get it. Members, go and do that poll. If you did it once and I've deleted what you've said, I'm sorry. I blame YouTube. Go and do it again. Thanks, guys. Toodle pips.